So what do I want to talk about? There is the subject right there. Let's talk about failure. Let's talk about failure. Let's talk about something that we're not always very good at talking about. Let's think about what the Bible has to say about this particular subject. There's a great verse there, Deuteronomy 31:8. The Lord is the one. And I felt this verse was for somebody today. Take it into your heart. Take some encouragement. If you get nothing else out of this message today, take this verse into your heart. The Lord is the one who is going ahead of you. The Lord here is talking to his servant Joshua, but there's no reason why we can't take the principle of this, apply it to ourselves today. The Lord is the one who is going ahead of you. He will be with you. He won't abandon or leave you. So don't be afraid or terrified. The Lord is with you. I want to talk about failure. This is something that we all experience. Lydia and I have a little 1-year-old, just over 1-year-old girl, and she's learning how to walk. She gets up and she's bumping into this and bumping into that, and she falls down. When she falls down, she just gets up again. She doesn't spend too long sitting on the ground going, like that. I mean, okay, sometimes she does, but most of the time she doesn't. She gets up, she gets going again. Failure is part of the process of living. And how we handle failure is really how we determines how we handle life. I remember my mom wanted to toughen me up. When I was a kid, I was brought up in a rough neighborhood, West Belfast, where the dogs walk about in twos. And child of the Troubles and all that, brought up in a very rough city. And I was into the arts. I was into music. I loved my music. I studied music. And Mom said, "No, we're going to toughen you up." So she sent me off for judo lessons. Any martial arts people here today? And I have to say that I believe that I am the single worst martial arts person who has ever lived. We did a tournament. It was our club going up against another club, and I was really nervous about it because I thought, I don't even know what to do. So I would go on and, break all the rules, Oh, I was a dirty player. It was terrible, And then they put you opposite your opponent. My opponent was a little skinny fella. My family were all watching this, by the way. They were all, all the family members, granny, granda, uncles, aunts, uncles I didn't even know I had, sitting there watching, And so they put you opposite your opponent, and then it came my turn to face this opponent, and he's a skinny boy, and I thought, I'm sure I can take him. And as I stood there, with confidence and conviction, he beat the living daylights out of me. Humiliated me, and my family have never talked to me ever since that. That's not true, actually, but it was like we went out, and there was that sort of gracious silence, and then Mom says, "You've got a great heart." To which I said, "Well, no, not after the beating I took today. I think that's probably even damaged now as well." But it was like, and then I went away embarrassed and so on. But we all go through experiences in our lives where we fail. We all fail. We all experience failure. And yet, the irony is that the very thing that all of us experience from time to time in life is the very thing that very often none of us want to talk about it. Why do we not want to talk about it? Pride. Because we want to project an image that I'm better than that these things don't happen to me, that I don't go through stuff like that. But really, that is not real. That is not helpful. I don't think that it's helpful to your faith. I don't think it's helpful to your life. And certainly, if you read the Bible, and we'll take a look at some scriptures in a moment, but God does not want us to live in denial. He wants us to trust him through whatever we're going through. Sometimes failure can have consequences in life, has consequences on relationships. It has consequences on how we handle relationships. Has consequences on family life, has consequences on marriage and married life, has consequences on career. Failure can have consequences in all kinds of areas in our lives. Sometimes, of course, failure, it is true to say, can be avoided. The failure that we experience is because we have badly messed up. And we knew that there was the potential for us to mess up. In fact, we knew that it was likely for us to mess up. Who knows what I'm talking about here today? And yet we just go ahead thinking that I'm that good, that I'm going to be the first person ever to get away with that. Who knows what I'm talking about here today? And then, of course, you're sitting down and you're feeling sorry for yourself because you messed up just like everybody else who's ever tried that has messed up. And so sometimes failure can be avoided. How do you avoid unnecessary failure? Well, you avoid it when you listen a little more to the right people, not to the wrong people, but to the right people. That's why church is important. That's why life groups are important. That's why getting around good people who love Jesus is really important. You will become like the company that you keep. So if you're around a bunch of idiots who are living crazy lives and doing all kinds of silly things, don't be surprised when and you're not good enough. You're not that good to resist peer pressure. I'm telling you. So if your friends are doing it, they'll keep saying, come on, come on, come on. And eventually you'll end up doing some stuff that you will totally regret doing. And so that's why we believe church community is important, not because we're better than anybody else, but because we can be vulnerable, we can be real, we can encourage each other, and we can actually learn what it means to follow Jesus along the way. So sometimes failure can be avoided if we just listen to the right people. Failure can be avoided if we just have the humility to humble our hearts and say, ask for some help. Stop trying to cope on your own. All of us need to ask for help sometimes as well. And of course, if we'll be willing to humble ourselves, the Bible says pride comes before a fall. Pride is the thing that, pride is this weird thing that sort of elevates you and then lets you down very badly. That's pride. And I think that God doesn't want us to experience that. But sometimes failure, when it happens, the issue is not the failure itself. The issue is how we handle failure. So failure itself can be sometimes overblown, can be over-egged as this big deal in my life. Well, actually, I think that the issue is how we're handling it. Because if failure is something that happens to us all, then how we handle it really matters. For some people, the way that they handle failure is that it leaves them crumbled, broken, to the extent that they fall down and never get up again. That's what happens with some people. Some people never recover from failure. They don't know how to recover from failure. For some people, it leaves them bitter and it leaves them lacking confidence. I think this is particularly true when you are living on the receiving end of failure that was not necessarily your fault. Maybe a failed family situation, a dysfunctional situation that you were brought up in, and you're trying to get to grips with everything that's happened, but you struggle to do that. And then the impact that has on you is in your relationships and your interactions with other people. And, you struggle to deal with pressure, struggle to deal with things that are happening to you in life. And then for some people, they become very bitter. And when bitterness sets in, it has an impact on confidence. Bitter people are people who live with something to prove. But in the trying to prove, what tends to happen is that there's a bitter edge to it. So I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to show you. And I totally get that. I totally get that there are some people like that in life. And of course, some people even go on to do well who have that kind of mindset. But it's not a happy life. It's not content. What's the point of being a multimillionaire if you're the most miserable person on the planet? Are you with me here? What's the point of being super duper successful if you're so utterly unhappy in life? Whereas there are some people in life who don't have a lot, but they're the happiest people you'll ever meet. And I think I know what company I'd rather keep. I mean, if the millionaire offers me a few pounds, I'll take it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not that good. But I mean, I want to be around some people who appreciate life. And who maybe have learned to deal with some stuff in their lives as well. But I think it's the lack of knowing how to handle failure that is the issue. Sometimes there can even be this sense of God having abandoned us. Why did you let me go through this? Why did you let me go through this experience? Why did you allow me to go through this experience? But there's the verse right there. I feel it's the verse for the day. The Lord is the one who's going ahead of you. He will be with you. He won't abandon or leave you. So don't be afraid or terrified. Do not get it into your mind that you are an accident, that your life is an accident, that what you're going through is like, God is not there. He is right there with you, and he's wanting to help you. He's wanting to help you, but he will not force you to be helped. You see, that's where God respects you. He will not force you to be helped. It's like if I as a pastor had my way, everybody in Loughborough would go to church. And they'd be there on time as well. And everybody would be there. I mean, it would just be amazing. Right? But that's the challenge. You say, but you can't force that. That's just not something that you can force to happen. And that's a bit like God. He cannot force you to receive help. The only way that we can receive that is if there is the humbling of our own hearts. And I get it when you've experienced failure. The last thing in the world sometimes you want to do is humble your heart. You think, well, I've been humbled more than enough right now, so I don't need to humble my heart. But the truth is that it is a heart issue. It is a hard issue. If we'll humble our heart, then that is opening our heart for the Lord to use us. And then what can happen is that failure, instead of being the worst thing that ever happened to you, failure can suddenly be a catalyst. See, if failure is something that you can learn from, then you can learn from those mistakes, whether they're mistakes that you've made or whether they're mistakes that somebody else has made. And you can say, well, I can learn from that. If I was brought up in a family situation that was quite dysfunctional and not right, the biggest danger, and I think this is a psychological thing more than anything, you think in your mind, yeah, and I'm probably going to mess it up as well. You're a single person and maybe you're coming from a situation that was very challenging growing up, and then you've got this thing in your mind, yeah, and my marriage is going to be a mess. I'll get married, but it's going to be a mess, and I'll probably be a terrible parent, and I'll mess it up. The generational thing will follow me. Listen, let me tell you something. When you become a child of God, a new bloodline has begun. This is a new beginning. You don't have to live. I think Christians over-egg the whole thing of generational curses. I think that's very dangerous. I believe in generational choices. Did you hear what I just said there? Generational curses is a powerless thing. Generational choices is the empowerment of the Holy Spirit to say things will be different. Things will be different. They're not going to be the same. Things in my life will be different. We can make the difference. And I believe that's the kind of faith that God is wanting to provoke out of our hearts today. You can learn from failure. Failure can be a friend in a weird way. Failure can be a friend. You can be creative. You didn't choose these circumstances. You didn't choose this. This is the card you've been dealt. You didn't choose this card. You didn't choose that. If you'd chosen your card, it would have been a far better card than that. But this is my card. It's the worst card of the pack. How do I play this? Well, you don't play it as the victim card, that's for sure. You play it as your ace card because you've got a little touch of genius going on there that nobody else knows about. It's called your story. It's called your narrative. This is my narrative. This is authentic me. This is what I've been through. So this is my card. I'm not going to play this as the victim card. This is my ace card. This is an experience that nobody else has had. This is me. This is the making of me. Here's my card, Mr. Devil. Look at God's grace. Yes. Are you with me here? Yes. I'm not a victim. That's what old Jabez did. Jabez was more honorable than his brothers in the Old Testament. He didn't play the victim card. He thought, I'm going to be more honorable. When he was brought up in dishonor, he thought, I'm going to be more honorable. This is my card. I'm going to play it well. There was an old, my favorite composer, excuse me, this is a terrible illustration for those of you who don't like classical music, but I like classical music and I like Kanye. Jesus King. How many know Jesus King? The problem is, I could stand here and big up Kanye today, and as soon as I do it, nobody's going to listen to it. Because an old boy like me bigging up Kanye think, no, let's go to the old albums or now, whatever. You got to respect the guy, by the way, for producing that album. How amazing is that? Jesus is king. He didn't have to do that. That's amazing, isn't it? Anyway, but I'm talking about Beethoven. Some people like Kanye, some people like Beethoven. I'm a Beethoven man myself. I love Beethoven. I love a bit of classical music. You students, you ought to try that sometime. Just listen to a little touch of classical music. It'll get you in the mood for studying. And And I love Beethoven not because of the wonderful music that he produces, as brilliant and wonderful as it is, but I love it because of his story. So think about it. Great musician, composer, teacher, par excellence. But when he's in his 30s, he realizes he's going deaf. He realizes that this is a dilemma for him in his life. He realizes his health is good. He's going to live to be an older man, the chances are, but he's going deaf. He's going to live for many years with, as a guy who's deaf. And so he could have played the victim card, stopped, become a recluse, but he thought, no, I'm going to work with this. I'm going to work with this. This is the card I've been dealt. So he did this ingenious thing. He did all kinds of ingenious things, actually. He figured out that if he cut the legs off a piano and then he put a pole between the piano and his body, sometimes even on his chin, he could decipher tones and notes on the piano. So he found that even if I'm deaf, I can still decipher tones and notes. So he wrote Ode to Joy. The European Union, the Ode to Joy. Let's not talk about the European Union because that's a contentious issue. He wrote Symphony Number 9. Let's talk about it like that. Symphony Number 9, and he was completely deaf. And you tell me that you've got problems? He was totally deaf, and yet he did it. He actually went on to bless the world with incredible music, and he was dealing with this stuff in his own life. Failure does not have to be the end. Are you with me here today? Is this getting through to any hearts today? And I'm really trying to help us to have a fresh perspective on failure. Failure can often be a negative word, but I think that what the Lord is wanting to do today is to turn it around and turn it into a more positive experience, that this can be the making of you. If you let God do some stuff in your heart, then God can actually use this circumstance to make you. Failure is important. Do you hear what I just said there? Now, I know that's offensive right away for some Christians because they'll say, well, we want to hear about success. But no, failure is more important in a sense than success. I'm always skeptical of success books because they strike me as lacking authenticity. Because you got to think, is that the real story? What's the 10 steps to becoming a multi-billionaire? Here's the deal. If it was that easy, all of us would be multi-millionaires. If it was that easy, we'd all be doing it. So sometimes you got to use your brain before you buy and read some of the stuff. Think, well, if it was that easy, it would be happening for everybody. But actually, failure, I find, is a more honest teacher than success. Failure has this wonderful way of just helping you to recognize, I am not that good. And that is part of the process of grace. It's not that we will look down on ourselves. That's nothing to do with that. It's about opening our hearts, saying, Lord, I need your grace. And when we get to that point in our lives, that is one of the most beautiful places we can ever get to. A person who lives their life reliant on God's grace. What is grace? Grace is undeserved favor. It's favor that you didn't deserve. It's when God opens doors for you. It's when God gives you opportunities. It's when God makes a way where there doesn't even seem to be a way. It's when God gets you through it. Sometimes he gets you out of it, and we love it when that happens. But sometimes grace is when God gets you through it. You get through it. You emerge from the other side and you say, look at what the Lord has done for me. I should have been a goner, but here I am alive and well today. Some of you should have been goners here today, but God's grace has kept you alive and well. And I'm so grateful for that. But sometimes failure, what it does is that it grounds us in reality. It builds steel into your heart. Builds authenticity, helps us to lean into God's grace. It propels us. If you let it, don't fail backwards, you fail forwards. And let it propel you to the next thing that God has for you in your life. It stops us being self-sufficient. That's the most dangerous place in the world. And it helps us to develop stickability, helps us to be faithful. Helps us to be faithful. There's a word that the old man talked about on there. Love and faithfulness. Loving each other is more than an emotional thing. Loving each other is when somebody winds you up and they fail and you keep loving them. I mean, the Lord, when I was a younger guy, I was so impatient. And I'm still not the most patient guy, but hey, I'm old now, so it's okay. And I'm grumpy sometimes. But when I was a younger guy, I was impatient. And I remember my driving in my younger years, and it's still not great. But in my younger days, it was just wild. Just wild. And there was one day I was meant to be preaching at a church not that far away from where I lived, and I thought to myself, well, I'm going to leave a little bit late because I'll just, the Lord's given me permission to break the speed limits and so on, grace, favor. So I got in my car, and then I realized as I'm driving along, I'm going to be late for this meeting if I don't hurry up. So I'm going faster and faster and faster and faster. And then I pull up at this set of traffic lights, and there's one of these boy racers with a Vauxhall Nova with the big exhaust pipe on the back. I don't ever get that. Just buy a Merc, the amount of money he spent on the thing, But he's like sitting there, and he looked over at me as if to say, do you want to race? And I looked back, and the man of God in me said, God bless you, keep going. And I looked at him, but then the man of Todd said, yes, absolutely, you're on. You are on. And I have this little button in my car that says S. It's a powerful button. And I pressed it, and I left him behind. Boom. And then I'm on my final mile going to this church. And then there's a car driving very slowly in front of me. It's a windy road. I think, you not understand I'm a man of God? I've got to preach about the love of God here. Come on. And this guy's going slowly. So then I picked my moment. In a foolish moment, I pulled out. I overtook him. I pulled back into the lane again. And then it came to me to turn into the church to preach. So I turned left into the church. But then I noticed the car follows me into the car park of the church. And I thought, okay, this could get interesting. So I thought, I'll not park too close to the door. So then I began to drive over towards the far side of the car park, and I noticed that this car then followed me over to the far side of the car park, and I thought, oh no, this could get violent. And anyway, as I pull over to the other side of the car park and I get out of the car, I noticed that the guy who I overtook and looked at in an unseemly manner, he was the pastor of the church. And he didn't say a word, which is even worse, isn't it? How many of you know when your mother doesn't even say a word, you know it's bad then? She just looks at you. And he just looked at me. And then in the worship time that I wanted the ground to swallow me up. In the worship time, I thought, how you just did this? I failed. And it was like God challenged me, will you slow down? You were so insensitive that the guy who's leading the church, you even overtook him. It's like, come on, slow down. Come on. And I failed. But then it's learning from that, isn't it? It's learning that sometimes in my rush, the price that I pay to achieve what I want to achieve is like, it's not even worth it. What's worth it here? So we got to make sure that we learn from our mistakes. Are you still with me here today? If we can learn from failure, we're going to learn a whole lot. Let's go through some characters. Our time is nearly gone. Are you still with me here for a few minutes? Let's talk about Moses for a second. Let's have Moses on the screen there. Can you see his name? Moses, the man of God. And Moses, at the age of 40, his life, he hits his midlife crisis. So first 40 years, brilliant. He's rescued from the river. He's brought into the palace. Son of, the daughter of Pharaoh's wife and so on. Wonderful, wonderful. And then when he's 40, he messes up. He thinks it's an act of justice, but he handles it all wrong to the extent that he kills a guy, just like you do. And then, they all hear about this, and then he has to go away because he's in big trouble. So then what does he do? At the age of 40, he then goes into the desert, and he spends the next 40 years in the desert. And he thinks he's done. He thinks he's finished for the next 40 years. Think about it. I mean, by the time you get to 40, you would have done at least a little something in life. But Moses is just utterly, utterly humiliated. He's in the desert. He thinks he's messed up, and he has. Much prefers being around sheep than people, like he's just totally messed up. But it was in the desert where God had to minister to Moses, get him back again. How old was Moses when he got going? 80. years old, 80 years old, after 40 years of feeling sorry for himself, 40 years of reclusivity, 40 years of just cutting himself off and thinking that he was done, God said, I think it's time to get going again, don't you? Reclusivity is never the answer. I know that sometimes that can happen to us. We can become reclusive. We can just want to be on our own. I don't want anybody around me in my life because people are quite annoying right now. How many of you have ever thought that in your mind? People are really annoying. Okay, just me. This is Moses. He's just fed up. But then reclusivity is never the answer. Never the answer. Never wise to cut yourself off. Never wise to just spend too much time on your own. And God had to teach Moses to really get going again. And of course, he led the children of Israel across the Red Sea towards the promised land. His best years were ahead of him. So there's a lesson in there. Do not assume that God is finished with you. Are you anybody hearing a word I'm saying here today? Do not assume that you are finished just because you may have messed up, even if it was a willful messing up. If you will have a humble heart and allow God to heal you and allow God to do some stuff in your life and allow God to undo you for a little season, because you can't buy your clothes from, what is it? What is that anyway? What is Tajay? Why is he pronouncing it wrong? I'm going to challenge him about that publicly. Next week when Dave Gilpin's here, I'm going to publicly challenge him about Tajay. Just, for a whole year, I've been trying to work out what you've been trying to say, Dave, Are you still with me here? Yeah. Let's go on. Well, let's talk about Elijah. Still with me? Great man of God. I'll maybe preach a whole message about Elijah one of these days. I mean, he was an outstanding. He is your stereotypical man of God. Saw the dead raised. Pretty decent ministry, don't you think? Yeah. Takes a lot to impress you guys, doesn't it? You see the dead raised, you think that's a decent ministry, right? But Elijah messed up badly. Elijah had a complete breakdown. We would say today that Elijah had a complete mental breakdown. The subject of mental health is certainly something that the Old Testament addresses. If you'll actually look at it, he just is in the desert. And the Jezebel has spoken her word into Elijah's life. I'm going to have you killed like you had the prophets of Baal killed. This is a powerful Elijah. This is the man of God. What does he do? He becomes reclusive. It's that thing that we humans do. When we feel like we're failures, we go into the room and we shut the door, and that's it. And we watch Netflix for the next 3 years. Are you with me? And that's it. Elijah is in the desert. And then as he's in the desert, thinking that he's failed, thinking that he's finished, thinking that God doesn't have anything for him to do. I'm finished, Jesus, I'm gone. He sees the fire. God's not in the fire. And he sees the earthquake, and God's not in the earthquake. And then he sees the effects of the wind, and God's not in the wind. And then he hears a still small voice. And that's how God spoke to him. And listen, can I just say this to all if you get me and you want to know where I am theologically, I'm a Pentecostal. That's what I am. I'm an old-fashioned Penty. If you really want to know, I'm a Holy Ghost tongue-talking guy. I am there. I am right there. There's no meetings better than a Pentecostal meeting. It's just fantastic. But sometimes I think the challenge in our style of church is that we think that God always needs to be loud. Come on, God, speak to me, the fire. Some of you have heard me say this before. I get nervous when I hear Christians asking God to send the fire. I think, well, make sure that it's just in that direction, Jesus, not over here, because I need to get a few things sorted out before you do that, Otherwise, there will literally be nothing left of me, Fire, the fire. But God's not there, and God's not always in the fire. You hear that? Doesn't always have to be loud. Or what about the earthquake, the shaking? I was in a meeting once, and a preacher, it was a glorious moment. This preacher was pushing people over. Have you been in a meeting like that? The preacher's pushing, and then they do, Jesus. And I could see what he was doing, and I thought, not me. And he was saying, Jesus. Actually, you can push as hard as you want, buddy. I'm not going down for anybody. And glorious moment. Everybody else fell down and Roy Todd's still standing there. My arm was even out like this, like, balancing. It's like we expect God to be pushy. The shaking, it's got to be the shaking. Well, okay, God does that sometimes, but not always. And then what about the wind? The wind of the Spirit. It's got to be action. Sometimes you've just got to listen out for that still small voice. And some of you are going through stuff today. Maybe it's failure of your own making, or maybe it's not even of your own making. But the most powerful gift you can give yourself on any given day is to listen out for the voice of God. What is God saying to you? If you have an ear to hear what he's trying to say to you today, there's a little word from heaven in here somewhere, which is it's not the end. God can do amazing things with your life. Failure is not your destiny. This is not your destiny to be known as the failure. God can do incredible things with your life if only we'll take the time to listen to what he has to say. What about Samson? He failed, the strong man, because of his long hair. We had a phase in this church where boys were getting long hair. And I'm glad that phase is over. I'm going to be honest with you. It was like we had a bunch of Samsons in church, all coming on with their long hair, And then they'd say to me, when are you going for long hair? But I'm not getting long hairs, I'm not getting tattoos. Is that clear? I'm not falling over when some preacher tries to push me over as well. But it's like Samson is the strong man, but he wasn't strong enough to resist temptation. Oh, I feel the anointing. You strong man, you're not that good. When temptation comes knocking on your door, you're not that good. That's why you need to be in a community that will love you enough to challenge you. And even if you get annoyed, so what? It might just save your life. What are you doing? What are you doing? And Samson messed up badly. And he gave in to temptation. Of course, that wasn't the end. God still had things for him to do. And in a moment of glory, they forgot about his hair. It grew back and his strength was strong enough to pull down a sinful place. But there's a message in there for all of us that Samson was in his final days, he was a great man. Even though he'd messed up, he was a great man. There's nothing worse than seeing great people not being great. Let's go on for another few. I don't have time to talk about these. Can you go on? There's David. King David failed when kings should be at war. David was not. He saw Bathsheba bathing on the roof. I don't know why she was doing that, but anyway, maybe, I don't know, I've often thought about that. What was that all about? David's up there, oh, wow, and it's like, and he stayed there for the next 3.5 hours, And it's like when he should have been at war, that's the whole point. When he should have been at war, fighting, then he wasn't at war. He wasn't where he should have been. When you are not where God wants you to be, that's a very dangerous place to be. Then failure will come. I mean, it's just inevitable. It's going to happen. And so therefore, if we can learn to just take the heart of this message today and learn from David, I would encourage some of you, I wish I had more time to talk about it, to go and read about King David. I'm going to bring this message to an end. Maybe we'll talk some more next week. That's always my words. I'm going to talk more about this next week and then talk about something completely different next Sunday as well. For every failure, there's forgiveness, friend. I want to bring this to an end. Let's talk about failure. For every failure, there is forgiveness. For every failure in your life, there's forgiveness. Somebody says, well, the things I've done some stuff, I've thought some thoughts, I've said some words. Can God really forgive me? Is it possible for me to receive God's forgiveness? And there's a genuine question that many people ask. Is that really possible? To which the answer is a resounding, of course. Do you really think that our failures shock God? Do you really think that God's looking down from heaven going, oh, it's like God is not taken by surprise by any of us. But he loves it when we say, Lord, I open my heart. I need your grace. That is the language that heaven loves. And he pours in his grace. And there's a soothing, healing, anointing in that grace that picks you up, that gives you favor that you never even deserved. Because that's what grace is, undeserved favor. And you get up again and you walk in the grace, in the favor of our amazing God. For every failure, there's hope. For every failure, there is grace. For every failure, there's a future. For everyone who's ever experienced failure, there's still a future for you. There's failure, there's favor, even in the midst of your failure. And I think that there's a message from heaven here today. If we'll have an ear to hear what the Lord is trying to say to us, let's talk about this, let's think about this, but then let's make sure that the action that we take is the action of leaning into God's grace, because God's grace is your safe space. God's grace is what's going to get you through. Can you say amen to this today?